All right, so welcome everyone to Drew Does Tech, and this is Drew. It's been a while since I've done any content for the channel. I've been pretty busy in the background, but first month running the business seems to be doing pretty good. Hopefully, it'll keep building to where it's more sustainable. But I was expecting slow growth in the beginning, so I'm doing fine with that right now. I've got stuff set aside for that. But we're coming in today with some different content. It's now October 20th. Microsoft has officially made Windows 10 end of life. So if you're not on Windows 11 yet, either because you haven't bought a new computer to do Windows 11 or you're just not ready to move to Windows 11, but you need something else that you can look at, there are plenty of machines out there that are still perfectly good machines that might not be able to run Windows 11, even with a Rufus workaround. I've run into that where sometimes the Rufus workaround still isn't enough because some machines are just that old. Another option you can look into is Linux. And I know some of you may have weird perceptions in your mind or ideas in your mind that Linux is this super complicated system that you have to be some kind of techno nerd to know how to use. And years ago, that may have been the case, but in 2025, it's not so. You're looking at a Linux desktop right now. This is my daily driver. This is my everyday machine that's up in my living room upstairs that I use for everything. And this is a desktop I built for myself about a little over a year ago. I was going to do a feature on that because for its anniversary, but I never got around to filming it. But I may still do some stuff featuring this machine. But this is Linux Nobara. This is there are many thousands of different versions of Linux. That's part of the problem if you're new to Linux. It's trying to figure out what Linux is the good Linux for you. And we're going to solve that today. But this Linux is built mostly for gaming. It can do other stuff too, but it's built mostly for gaming. It's ready out of the box with gaming. As you can see, there's really no desktop icons on here except for this one Steam icon. And by default, this system comes with a Steam desktop icon. I could remove it. I could put other icons on the desktop if I wanted to, but I leave it alone. I like to typically keep a clean desktop, but this doesn't bother me over here. I just leave it be. So I usually use my, what you would call on the Windows machine, taskbar or toolbar to source stuff I'm using. I don't really keep stuff on my desktop. So, but you know, you can do all kinds of stuff. But the thing that scares most people about Linux is this right here, the terminal. I should have minimized this before I started recording so it didn't take up the full screen, but normally when I use a terminal, I like to use the full screen. But these days with Linux, you can get by without using the terminal. Just like on Windows, there's what Windows would call a start menu. On Linux, it's an applications menu, but this is all stuff I have pinned here that I use somewhat frequently. And from here, I can access everything else on my system, just like you would on a Windows machine. I use Brave browser, but right there's my web browser. Steam, some other devices or applications I tend to use. Applications that are currently running. These are for today's discussion. Well, this is Audacity recording the audio, but this is part of what we're doing today. But it works just like a regular Windows machine, but I'm just going to show you here. We are running Linux Nobara Linux 6.17 kernel. So yes, you can use the terminal. You cannot use the terminal. You don't need the terminal. There's an updater right here that'll update everything for you. There's a package manager here you can use to look for software that you don't already have installed on your system. So, you know, it updates a little differently than Windows, but it's the same concept. And it usually takes less time than Windows because Windows has so much telemetry and so many things packed into it. But this is everything that's currently installed in the system. If I wanted to look for packages, these are existing packages I have here, but if I wanted to look for packages, I could search here. Same here. If you are familiar with Linux, but maybe not Nobara, it's based off Fedora, so it does have some ties with DNF and whatnot. It doesn't use DNF by default as its updater. It uses its own updater that's based off DNF. But I wanted to show you today what you can do on your current machine to try and decide what kind of Linux works for you. For most people who are new to Linux, who've never used Linux before in their life, I typically recommend Linux Mint. It's a very lightweight Linux. It'll work on very old systems. I have laptops here that are more than 12 years old that are running Linux Mint just fine, like the newest iterations of Linux Mint. Ubuntu is another good one if you're new to it. There's also different desktop managers for Linux. This one, Nobara uses KDE, which is very similar to Windows. If you're more attuned to like the Mac type interface, Ubuntu uses GNOME, although this Linux Nobara also comes with a GNOME variant. But something you can do to just try out different Linux systems to find one that works for you is you can use a virtual machine. There's a bunch of different ones out there on Windows. I believe VMware is a popular one to use. VirtualBox is the one I'm using, and it works on Windows as well, and it's free. But you can basically just go on the internet and just download whatever operating system you want. So you can, let's say you want to try Linux Mint. You can just go here, Linux Mint download. This is Linux Mint, the official Linux website for Linux Mint. Download Mint, Linux Mint 22.2. You just go here to all versions because it has different versions. I recommend Cinnamon for most people because it's a variant. It's a variant of an older version of GNOME, but it actually looks more like KDE does, kind of, and it's very simple. It's very lightweight. These are other more advanced Windows managers here. For someone who's not used to using Linux, I would definitely recommend starting with Linux Mint, the Cinnamon desktop variant. You should be fine. But you can download any version of Linux you want to try, and then you can create a virtual machine here. I already have one of Ubuntu. I'm just going to fire it up to show you real quick, but I will also be showing you how to install one or how to set up a virtual machine using Fedora. What's my password real quick? So this is Linux Ubuntu. Okay. I don't know if it's going to let me actually log back in or not. That's fine. Okay. We'll just do it again. I'll just ignore that because it'll behave just like a regular desktop. So when it has updates and things, it'll ask for them. But you know, when you log out of a system on a virtual machine, it doesn't always behave like a normal computer. So usually you don't want to do that. Plus, it goes by instances, so it may not even necessarily remember that it was going to do that on the next restart. It may just restart from the same checkpoint that it started from originally, which means you're going to get the same message, although it didn't reappear, so maybe it did work. All right, so yes, this is a virtual machine with Ubuntu already installed. Ubuntu uses GNOME, so it's kind of more like Mac in appearance, although I have an extension installed that makes it so that it's called a task manager in Linux, which is confusing if you're in Windows because task manager is what Linux calls your system monitor. So this is what you probably think of when you think of task manager. But in Linux, this is your task manager down here. So I have an extension that leaves it down here, so it kind of behaves more like a Mac. But normally you would need to click this to see your taskbar. GNOME works in Windows, so you can create additional windows. You can do the same thing with KDE, honestly. But yes, just like before, and then this is all the different apps I have access to. Brave browser. This has additional drivers, firmware updaters, everything here. So software updaters. So you can do it all from right here without needing a terminal. Although if you are familiar with Linux and you do know how to use a terminal to update, you can still use the terminal to do it. So actually, I think I have it in an alias, so it's just update. Oh well, I'll do it this way so you can see it, because without the alias, this is actually how you would be doing it. So, oops. So if you're doing it in the terminal, it would be sudo apt update and then sudo apt upgrade. But you can do them both together with a double ampersand. And then it would ask for your password, which is your user password. And then it'll run the updates. So if you wanted to update through a terminal, this is how you would do it. But you still can do it through the GUI, just like Windows with these updaters. And you can even just start off using the GUI, and then if you want to explore the terminal, you can do that. When I very first started using Linux, when I very first started using Linux, it wasn't as friendly with the GUI. You still kind of had to be familiar with the terminal. But in my most recent run with Linux, I did actually just start using the GUI at first. And then, like, I don't know, a week in, I started forcing myself to use the terminal more. So I got refamiliarized with it and more comfortable with it. And so you can do something similar if you do want to learn how to use the terminal. The terminal is the most efficient way to manage your system. And it's the same thing on Windows. Windows has PowerShell or CMD. Either one of those is a terminal, and you can do system maintenance through those terminals, just like you can on Linux. But it is the most efficient way to manage a system. But again, you don't need to. I'm just doing this as an example to show you different ways Linux is used. But you could also do this by just clicking the software updater, and it would do the same thing. When this is done, I'm going to close this down. I'll show you how to set up a virtual machine using Fedora. It worked before I started recording, so let's hope that that trend continues. But you can use a thumbstick and a USB when you know what kind of Linux system you want to install. And you can use a USB creation tool if you're on Windows. Rufus is what I recommend. It's pretty easy to use. But when you're setting up a virtual machine, you don't need a USB. You just download the disk image, the ISO file, and then install it from wherever you have it saved on your host machine. But when you are installing a new operating system on a Windows machine, you do need to know which button you use to access your BIOS, because there's some things you need to change. There are some Linux distributions that will work with Secure Boot. I think Ubuntu does. I think Fedora does, but not all of them do. So typically, you'll have to go into your BIOS before you attempt to install Linux, and you'll have to disable Secure Boot. And you may also have to enable Legacy Boot, because most Windows is UEFI by default. And while Linux can run with UEFI, some of them to install, you need Legacy Boot enabled for it to work. So those are the two things you would have to adjust: is disable Secure Boot and enable Legacy Boot in your BIOS, and then you should be able to just change your boot order in your BIOS so that your system boots from USB first rather than from the local disk, and then you run the installer and install a new system. You'll see some of that when I show you how to set up a virtual machine. I'm just waiting for this to finish. In post, I'll probably time lapse this or edit some of it out so that it doesn't take up a bunch of time of us just sitting here staring at the terminal doing its thing. Because I don't want to be running this virtual machine while creating a new virtual machine, because all virtual machines get their resources from your host machine. So when you tell it how much RAM it has, how much storage it has, all of that, it gets it from your actual machine. But it only uses it while it's running. So if I have this machine running and then I try to set up a new virtual machine, I won't even have the resources to do it, because they're the same resources that the host machine is using to set up the virtual machine. So you can only run them one at a time. But this should finish up, and then we will do the Fedora machine. One thing that is really nice about Linux, though, is its system is journaled. So what that means is it keeps tabs on everything it does. So even right now, while it's running this update, it's journaling its progress in this update. So if something happened, and you should never, ever, 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 ever intentionally interrupt the system when it's in the middle of updating something. Anytime it's reading or writing, don't interrupt it. That can create critical errors. But if something were to happen, say you had a power outage while it was in the middle of running this update that it's doing right now, everything it's done up to this point is journaled. So you just run the update again when the system is restored, and it will already know that it's done this much. So it will resume updating from this point internally, which is very nice. Okay. Normally it doesn't hang like this. It might be because we're recording. But I'm going to cut a bunch of this out. I wonder if I should just kill it, because it is just a virtual machine. It's not going to hurt it. Yeah, for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and kill this. Normally you wouldn't want to do this, but this is a virtual machine and this was just a demonstration. So I'm just going to kill this. Yes, close it. I know that's bad. We're going to go ahead and close this. And if anything happens to that, it's versioned. I can, I forget where it's at, but I can go through all the different versions of it. Yeah, here we go. So I can go through all these different versions of it because it's versioned. So if something happens, I can just jump back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up a new virtual machine so I can show you guys how that's done. So on VirtualBox here, we're just going to click New. And this is the default folder where it stores all the virtual machines it creates. You know what? I created one earlier. I should make sure it's gone before I do it again. Okay, yeah. Move the trash. Okay. Because I created one earlier before recording just to see how it was going to work. So we're going to use the Fedora ISO that I have installed on my computer. It is a Linux operating system. We're just going to name it Fedora. And then it doesn't do unintended install. So here we're going to specify how much resources the virtual machine has access to. It starts at 4 megs, but it can get up to a lot more because I have 64 gigs of RAM in this machine. So we're going to give it about 32-ish, and then the number of cores it gets. This machine has 24 cores. We're going to give it 11. And I think we'll go ahead and use EFI because Fedora can support EFI. And then we're going to give it some more hard drive space. We'll say 229, sure, why not? And then we just click finish. And now we have a Fedora virtual machine, which we can start. And then it will take us through the install process to install Fedora. We're going to test it first. That previous screen you saw before I clicked on the test, that's a bootloader. All machines use them, but on most you don't see them. But on many Linux systems, you will see the bootloader. That one's called Grub. It just gives you your different boot options to start your system, test your system, recover your system. Okay, so this is the install environment of Fedora. If you wanted to, you could choose not now that you don't want to start installing it, so you can play around with it, familiarize yourself with it first, and then install it. But it's a virtual machine, and the whole point of that is to play around with it. So we're just going to go ahead and install it. It may run a little slower than normal just because I am also recording. So we're going to go ahead and you can choose with Fedora to encrypt your data or not encrypt your data. It's a virtual machine, so we'll just leave it alone. So then we just click through the process and then we just sit here and wait. And it's just like normally installing software on your computer. So we just sit here and we'll just wait for the install process. And then it'll boot us into a Fedora environment, and then we can play around in Fedora. And just like Ubuntu, Fedora defaults to GNOME desktop, but it also offers a KDE variant. I believe Ubuntu also offers a KDE variant if KDE is more to your liking. And again, if you aren't following all these terms, KDE is this desktop that I'm using here. That's very Windows-esque. So that's another option. There are many different desktop managers in Linux, but the two primary ones that most people use are either GNOME or KDE. And for a beginner, I would just stick to those two options. And to help you better understand the difference between the two, again, GNOME is more like Mac in the way it's set up, and KDE is more like Windows in the way it's set up in terms of its interface. But again, Linux is much more lightweight than Windows. It doesn't have all the telemetry and all the extra stuff, so it doesn't take as many resources to install. It's not as intense on your resources. It's a good way to get more life out of a really old machine. Like I said, I have a laptop that's more than 12 years old that I still use to this day, and it's currently running Linux Mint Cinnamon on it. And my wife has a refurbished laptop that I bought her off of Amazon for like $300 and something a couple of years ago. And it actually came with Windows 11 installed on it. And I removed Windows 11 and put Linux on it for her, and she loves it. She's totally happy with it. She uses Windows 11 on her work machine, so she knows how to use Windows 11. She just doesn't like it. It's her personal preference. Okay, so we're just waiting for this to finish, and then we'll play around with Fedora Linux a little bit, and then we'll wrap up. But I just wanted you guys to see that Linux isn't scary. It's not a monster that you have to be some nerd to know how to use. Anyone can use it nowadays. It just helps to be a nerd. So now we're in a live Fedora environment. Let's go ahead and up this a little bit. Let's do 1920 by 1080. There we go. Keep. So just like Ubuntu, except I don't have the extension here. So this is the way it would GNOME would normally operate. Is you just have to click this little thing in the upper left corner to access your taskbar. But what we're going to actually do real quick is we're going to do a restart because it thinks we're still in the installer environment. But by restarting it, it'll run us through the initial desktop setup. Because normally, if you were installing it not in a virtual machine, but on a computer, just like Windows, after the USB installer is done, you would remove the USB and restart it to actually initialize the machine. So we're going through all of that now. You do want to enable third-party repositories because Linux is containerized. So while, yes, you can just go out into the wild of the internet and download something like you would on Windows, what kind of helps, it's not perfect. When Linux has its fair share of problems just like Windows and Mac, but part of what helps keep Linux safer is the majority of the programs you install on Linux come from repositories that are maintained and approved and monitored by the people who are responsible for whatever flavor of Linux you're operating. So everything's trusted and signed and secure in that respect. So it keeps you safer than just going out to the worldwide internet to download something. So, for example, and another thing you're going to have to get used to with Linux versus Windows is not all Windows software runs on Linux. And the stuff that does requires extra steps. It's not just download it and run it. So you have to look for Linux equivalents. And a lot of stuff that you're going to want to look for, a lot of the common stuff you're going to want to look for, there's already variations of it installed on the system. We'll cover that here while this is doing its thing. So, for example, Office. So instead of like Word or Microsoft Office, you have LibreOffice, which is free Office. And Writer is their equivalent of Word. Calc is their equivalent of Excel. I think Impress is their version of PowerPoint. So you have variations of things you're used to using in other systems. Yeah, I think this is just running slow because I'm recording too, because it shouldn't be taking it this long. So yes, you have to look for variations of things that you want, but this is like your app store for Fedora. So you just type in the type of app, search for the type of app you're searching for, and you can find it in here, and you can install it and run it and manage it. And this is also where you can see what packages you have installed. Like Firefox is usually installed by default on Linux. But yeah, these are the LibreOffice stuff, your system monitor. Rhythmbox is like a music player. There's your terminal. Text editor is like your notepad. But this is also where you would manage your updates um, on your system through here instead of using a terminal. So if I wanted to apply all these updates, just like on how Windows has its little updater, you just go through your software manager here and go to this updates tab, and then you just click download and it will apply all these updates, and then you don't have to do all that fancy terminal magic like I showed you over on the Ubuntu virtual machine. And each flavor of Linux has its own package management system as well. So when you saw me on the terminal on the the Ubuntu virtual machine, you saw me type in the sudo apt yada yada, and sudo is actually super user do. That's how you do administrative stuff on Linux. But apt is the package manager for Ubuntu and Debian based Linux. And then earlier, when I was talking about Nabara, you may have heard me mention DNF, which is the Fedora package manager. So they all have their own package management system, and that's something that's not really important to you necessarily if you're just doing it all through the GUI like this. So that only matters if you're trying to do it through the terminal, where you yourself are physically calling to the package manager. For a beginner who's just trying to install Linux and use Linux and get comfortable with Linux, you don't need to worry about DNF, APT, all that stuff, or sudo, or any of that. Just where to click to get your software and get your updates. That's all. That's all you need to know. And this is what you're looking at right here. So, and like I said, this is kind of like your Microsoft Store on Windows, because this is also where you get your different apps. So there's creation tools, work tools, play, development tools, learning, socializing. You can just click any one of these categories and see, like, here's a audio tube, YouTube music app, OBS Studio. That's what I'm recording with right now. Or you can look under play. There's different kinds of game apps you can download and play. Emulator tools. Different little Unity games. And then if we go back here and say socialize, a bunch of different types of chat apps. And RSS feed apps and blogging and all kinds of social tools, web browsers. Like I said, Linux usually comes default with Firefox, but you can use other browsers too. It's still running those. Where is the search function? I thought there was a search function. Maybe I just need to click on a category and then I can search. Huh. I'm pretty sure there's a way to search on here. Maybe I just can't right now because I'm doing updates. Because there should be a way to look for specific packages on here. Yeah. Huh. I'm sure I'm just missing something. Because there absolutely should be a way on here to just type in, I want to find X thing. Like there's Google Chrome. Ungoogled Chromium. Dev version of Google Chrome. Development version of Google Chrome. There's Brave. Edge, if you really want that. VPNs, wikis, all kinds of different stuff you can get here. And Fedora comes with its own USB creation tool, Fedora Media Writer. Rufus isn't really going to be a thing you're going to use on Linux. You're going to use something like Fedora Media Writer or Bolina Etcher or something similar to those. Or Ventoy. Ventoy is a good one too, but that one is a bit advanced. So for someone who's maybe not that advanced, who just wants something simple they can use, Fedora Media Writer comes pre-installed on Fedora. You can get Bolina Etcher on any Linux system. You can usually get it right out of the packages. I'm going to guess it's under maybe the development category. A lot of like coding and programming stuff here. Maybe it's not under development. Work, maybe. Huh. Huh. Okay, so like here, actually, well, I don't know where to find that, but I just saw something else that was a perfect example of alternative software. Where was it? Where was it? Where was it? There it is. So like Adobe doesn't really work on Linux. So unless you absolutely have to have Adobe, if you just need some kind of painting photo manipulation program, GNU, Image Manipulator, or GIMP is going to be something you're going to use on Linux. And it's not as good as Photoshop, but it's good for free. Very good for free, actually. So it sounded like the updates were ready to install. Yep, so now it wants to restart an update just like Windows would. Restart and install. Installing updates. All right, starting to pick up now. And now it wants to hang at 97. Well, while this is finishing up here, what I will say is another great thing about Linux itself is it's all open source software, which means it's all developed and distributed at zero cost to you, the end user. There are some Linux maintainer groups like Fedora and Ubuntu and Debian and Red Hat that do provide enterprise level packages. And a lot of that mostly has to do with server rather than desktop. And in those systems, in those setups, they do typically charge. But for the average everyday Joe, every version of Linux is available at no cost to you. Most of the time, though, you're not going to have a dedicated support team either because it's free and it's open source. However, the internet has plenty of resources available to help people with anything they may be running into with Linux. So don't be discouraged. Give it a go. Here we have a fully updated version of Linux Fedora here. The updates have all been installed. We're all up to date. So here we go. I really thought there was a search function in here. Oh, it's literally Control F. That's just a message from the virtual machine. Okay, so apparently inside the virtual machine, Control F does not work. Good to know. Okay, so outside of the virtual machine, you would just use Control F. Oh wait, there's a search bar right there. Yeah, but that's what's installed. Okay, so I just need to pay more attention. So yes, right there, there's a little magnifying glass. You just click that and type in here whatever you're looking for. Brave. Belina Etcher. Really? No Belina Etcher? Huh. Okay. Interesting. Probably because they would just want you to use Fedora Media Writer. Alrighty. So that is all set up now. So you can do this little tour app if you want to see how Fedora works. You can just play around with it. And you can do this with any version of Linux. You can just throw it in a virtual machine, play around with it. If you want to save it for later, you can just go over here to close and save. You can save the machine state or shut it down, power it off. You also can just go over here and just do a normal shutdown like this. And there we are. Now both virtual machines exist right here to be accessed later. And we can just quit that when we're done with that. And that's everything I really have to show you guys there. I mean, really, you just want to play around with it yourself. I just wanted to show you that Linux is a viable option if you're still not sure about Windows 11. I think I just bumped my mic. Sorry about that. So yeah, if you're not sure about Windows 11 or your machine just can't run Windows 11, Linux is absolutely free. Just explore your options, look for something you feel comfortable with, play around with it in a virtual machine if you can, and then install it and go. If you're totally new to Linux, my recommendation is just get Linux Mint, Cinnamon. But feel free to try any of those, play around with them, do whatever works for you. And thanks you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.